'Twas the last minutes before Christmas vacation at Acequia Madre School in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Mrs. Delgado, the third-grade teacher, was saying goodbye to her students. So I want to wish you all a very Merry Christmas. I hope each of you has a wonderful vacation. We won't see each other now for 2 weeks. I do have one assignment for you, and that is to write a report on the most exciting thing that happened to me this Christmas. The school bell rang, and winter vacation began. Merry Christmas, children. Merry Christmas, Mrs. Delgado, the students responded. Antonio Gonzalez got his coat, met Carlos and Juan, and headed out into the cold afternoon. I was hoping we wouldn't have any homework, Antonio said to his friends. Carlos shook his head in agreement. Yes, me too. Last year, the most exciting thing that happened to me was when I went to the hospital when I knocked myself out on my sled. How'd you do that? Asked Antonio. Carlos and Antonio were new friends because Carlos had only recently moved to Santa Fe. I crashed into a tree. I smashed my sled into 1,000,000 pieces. But I know my dad is going to get me a new sled for Christmas this year. Do you know what you're getting? Antonio asked Juan. No, my parents always hide everything too good. How about you, Antonio? Well, I wrote to Santa Claus to bring me some new skis. Santa Claus! Carlos and Juan laughed together. You believe in Santa Claus? Antonio had forgotten that his friends did not believe in Santa Claus, but he had to. My grandfather says there is a Santa Claus, and he always tells the truth. Antonio tried his best to convince his friends. He's just telling that to your little sister and brother. Carlos wasn't convinced. Antonio could tell his friends didn't believe him. But I've asked him, and he says there is a Santa Claus and that he's seen him. He's kidding, said Carlos. That's stupid to believe that. You're in the 3rd grade. Just then, Carlos noticed a snowflake land right on the end of his nose. Look, it's snowing, he cried out as he pointed to his nose. I sure hope my dad gets me that sled, Carlos exclaimed. Antonio was glad that they weren't talking about Santa Claus anymore. But he determined that he had to find out, once and for all, if there was a Santa Claus or not. That evening at the dinner table, everyone was talking about the things that needed to be done for Christmas. Mama gave the orders. Antonio, you have to keep the sidewalk shoveled while you're home. Andrea was his younger sister, I want you to polish the silverware for the Christmas dinner. And Benito, you have to feed Winky. Winky was their cat. Then Grandfather said, and I need some help bringing in wood tonight. Antonio, would you help me? Yes, Grandpa. Then Mama brought the dinner to the table. Some enchiladas, pasoli, and fresh tortillas. Everyone knew Mama was a good cook. After dinner, Antonio put on his warm clothes and headed outside. It was dark, but he could see by the light of the moon the walkway to the old house in the back where his grandfather had lived all of his life. Antonio was going to help his grandfather with the wood, but he was also going to ask his grandfather once and for all about Santa Claus. When he reached the old wooden door of his grandfather's house, the door opened and his grandfather was standing there. Come in, Antonio. I was waiting for you. Antonio went into his grandfather's home. It was an old adobe house that Grandpa's father had built. The furniture was rich and heavy in the old way. The fire, crackling in the kiva fireplace, made it nice and warm. Would you like some hot chocolate before we bring in the wood, Antonio? Yes, Grandpa. Antonio walked over to the old table and crawled into a chair. Grandpa, can I ask you a question? I always like when you ask me questions, Antonio. What do you want to know? Grandpa, today when I was walking home from school, my friends laughed at me when I told them I asked Santa Claus to bring me new skis for Christmas. They said it was stupid to believe in Santa Claus. Well, what do you believe, Antonio? I believe you, Grandpa, and you have always told me there is a Santa Claus. Yes, I have. And that is because there is a Santa Claus. But you have to believe what you believe, Antonio. But, Grandpa, I want to believe you. Is there a Santa Claus? Most people believe there isn't, Antonio. particularly as they grow older. But I am an old man, and I believe in Santa Claus because I see him each Christmas. You see Santa Claus? How? There was a pause. Then Grandpa whispered, Santa Claus and I are friends, Antonio. Antonio looked into his grandfather's eyes, and it seemed his grandfather was telling the truth. But he also remembered the look in the eyes of his friends when he said he believed in Santa Claus. Oh, Grandpa, I don't know who to believe. How can I know for sure? Well, you hear the sleigh on the roof each Christmas, don't you? His grandfather asked. Yes, I've heard that, but Grandpa, my friends tell me you make those noises. Me at my age up on that roof? Grandfather laughed. Oh, Antonio, my good boy, you are getting older. I think we should go out and bring in the firewood. Antonio finished the last warm chocolate, hopped off the chair, put on his hat and mittens, and headed out into the beautiful New Mexico night. His old grandfather walked ahead of him to the big wood pile. There was a feeling of love in the air. Grandfather was the greatest man Antonio knew. Antonio watched as the old man dusted off the wood. He knew in his heart that Grandpa would not lie. But he knew he had to discover the truth about Santa Claus. And suddenly he knew how he would find out. Antonio, Antonio, his grandfather interrupted his thoughts. Bring your arms over here. Grandpa put 3 big pieces of piñón into Antonio's arms. Take these into your house. This will keep your family warm all night. Okay, Grandpa. Good night. Good night, Antonio. Christmas Eve night was always a time of laughter and joy in Antonio's house. The dinner had been served and Mama had brought in a large plate of fresh bizcochitos. Grandfather played his guitar, and the whole family sang the songs of Christmas. Antonio always liked it when they sang the old Spanish songs. Father had read the Christmas story. It was long, and as always, little Benito was sleeping, and Andrea's eyes were just about to close. It's late now, and time to go to bed, my niños. Father leaned over and gently picked Benito up in his arms. Antonio and Andrea, look here. Benito will get presents from Santa Claus tonight because he is fast asleep. You go now and get a good night's sleep. If Santa Claus comes and finds you awake, he won't stop and bring you his gifts. Feliz Navidad and buenas noches, my little ones. Buenas noches, Papa. Buenas noches, Mama. Antonio turned to his grandfather, who was putting on his heavy coat. Feliz Navidad, Grandpa. Grandpa turned. His eyes were bright and sparkling in the light from the fire. He looked at each person, then said, Feliz Navidad. Antonio went to his room. His father had already tucked Benito into bed. Antonio crawled into his bed. Father came by and kissed him on the cheek. Good night, Antonio. Good night, Papa. His father left. The house grew quiet as everyone settled in. Antonio listened and he thought. From his bed, he could see out the window. A bright moon lit the night. It was snowing. Big, gentle flakes fell slowly. Antonio wanted to close his eyes and fall asleep. But tonight he had to discover the truth about Santa Claus. He knew that soon he would hear the sounds on the roof. Antonio needed to know if his old grandfather would really climb on the roof to make the sounds. Slowly, quietly, Antonio crawled out of bed. Antonio had a plan. He glanced over and saw Benito fast asleep. He put on his warm winter things, then walked quietly to the window. For just a moment, Antonio thought he should just go back to bed. But then he heard it, the sound on the roof. This was his chance. Antonio pushed open the window and crawled out into the snowy night. His thoughts were racing as he walked through the snow. The ladder which he had leaned against the house was still there. He walked over, took hold of the rungs, and began to climb. He could hear what sounded like animals breathing and anxious hoofs prancing on the roof. He thought to himself, that Grandpa. He neared the top rung and paused. He didn't know what he wanted to see. The snow was falling hard now, and flakes landed on his cheeks. He heard the sound of footsteps walking away from him on the roof. This was his chance. He put pushed his head up over the edge of the roof to see what he could see. Through the falling snow, Antonio saw what looked like a real deer standing not far from him. But it was like no deer he had ever seen. It was enormous. Its eyes were moist and warm. Its head was moving quickly. It seemed excited. Each breath made clouds of dancing crystals. Antonio's eyes made out more deer through the snow. They too were anxiously prancing in the snow. Antonio's heart stopped for just a moment. These were reindeer. Had Grandpa gone to all this work just to impress him? Antonio's curiosity and wonder took over. He climbed onto the flat roof. Slowly he walked towards the large animals. He could feel their warmth. They were laced in beautiful harnesses. As Antonio walked by them, he suddenly stopped, for through the heavy snow, lit by the bright moon, was something he never could have imagined. It was a huge red sleigh. It was beautiful. Antonio slowly walked to it. It was rounded and shiny. There were rich black leather reins draped over a shiny brass rail. This sled was much bigger than Antonio had ever dreamed. In the back was a huge assortment of bags, the presents. Antonio had always imagined one small bag of toys, but this sleigh held lots and lots of toys. This wasn't his grandfather trying to impress him. This was for real. Antonio was touching Santa Claus's sleigh. All of a sudden, Antonio noticed something move. He turned his head, and over at the chimney, Antonio saw a huge man squeezing his way out of the chimney. Antonio froze. It was Santa Claus. Antonio was frightened that he might be seen. Quickly, he ran around the back side of the sleigh and crept down behind it. He peered around the edge of the sleigh and saw with his eyes what his mind could hardly believe. Walking through the snow was a large, white, bearded man with a big round cheeks in a red suit with a large black belt. It was just like the Santa Clauses he'd seen on street corners. But this one was different. In the moonlight, Antonio saw magic dancing in this Santa's eyes. He seemed more like a saint than a man. Santa Claus had a small empty sack draped over his shoulder. He almost ran to the sleigh. He was in a hurry, and Antonio heard him mutter to himself, "Where did I put my list?" Santa stopped and patted his pockets. For a moment he looked confused. Then a smile came onto his face, and he remembered, "Of course, I left it in the sleigh." Santa ambled up the sleigh, and in a moment was sitting high above Antonio. Antonio watched every move. He could hardly believe he was seeing this. He wondered if anyone would ever believe him. Santa Claus took the list and a large pencil and searched, then suddenly stopped, and as he drew lines to the list, he said, "Antonio, Andrea, and Benito. Okay, now where?" He looked at his list again and said, "Carlos." Carlos, Antonio thought to himself. He's on his way to my friend Carlos's. Antonio held on to the runners and leaned back to see if he could see a sled for Carlos, the sled his father was supposed to buy for him. But suddenly, Antonio heard the crack of a whip, and the sled jerked forward. Antonio moved with the sled. His feet were on the runners. He lost his balance for a moment, but grabbed the sleigh and held on to keep from falling. The sled lurched forward, and in a flash was in the air. Antonio closed his eyes and held on for dear life. When he opened his eyes, he saw his house, lined by farolitos, grow smaller and smaller as he rose higher and faster into the sky. He was flying. He wanted to scream, but didn't. He looked forward and saw the team of reindeer leaping full speed into the night. As they ran, the sled was pulled steadily through the air. Antonio could feel the surges with each leap. This was magic. Antonio looked down and saw the tops of the houses of Santa Fe lined with farolitos. It was a beautiful sight to see. The sleigh turned suddenly to the left and began to descend. Santa was going to land on Carlos's roof. There was a feeling of relief as Antonio realized he could get off the sleigh on Carlos's roof while Santa delivered the presents. The sleigh was flying now low over the rooftops, so fast it almost made Antonio dizzy. Antonio heard Santa yell out, "Whoa, Rudolph, whoa!" and the sleigh suddenly slowed down, whooshed to a stop in the snow on a short, flat roof. That was a difficult one, eh, Rudolph? The roof was short, and Santa had to make a very quick landing. Without delay, Santa reached back into the enormous collection of boxes and things and pulled out a long, shiny sled. He tucked it under his arm and crawled down from the huge sleigh and headed for the chimney. Sure enough, somehow, Santa and the sled fit into the chimney. Antonio wondered how, but this was no time to wonder. Antonio waited until Santa had gone down the chimney. Then he let go of the sleigh and took a quick look around the rooftop. The edges of the roof were lined with farolitos, the small paper bags lit by prayer candles, with sand in the bottom to keep them in place. Despite the light cast by the many farolitos, Antonio could see no easy way off the roof. He was a little frightened that he may not find a way down. Quickly, he ran through the snow to the front of the house and looked over the edge. There was no way to get down here. He continued walking along the edge of the rooftop, looking for a way to get down. But it was a long way down here, too. As he neared the back of the house, he saw the roof of a shed. It was an easy jump to it, and Antonio saw that along one wall of the shed was a tall wood pile, which he could climb down to. His escape was secure. Antonio was just about to jump to the shed roof when he remembered why he was up here in the first place. For all this fear, it had been a magical night. He turned and looked back. The reindeer were prancing excitedly in the snow. Rudolph was watching with his round eyes. The enormous sleigh glistened in the moonlight. Antonio smiled as he realized he now knew there was a real Santa Claus. He was just about to turn and escape when he noticed in the darkness an unusual light at the rear of the sleigh. It sparkled and danced. It was curious because Antonio had not noticed a light at the back of the sleigh before. His eyes squinted through the falling snow at the light. It was a fire. Santa's sleigh was on fire. Antonio could see what had happened. When Santa landed on the short roof, the runner caught hold of one of the farolitos. The lit candle tipped and started the bag on fire, and the bag on the runner had started the sleigh on fire. Antonio wanted to get away quickly, for he was afraid that Santa might blame him for the fire. He ran to the edge of the rooftop and got ready to jump, but he stopped. He looked back at the sleigh with all its joy of Christmas, and Antonio got very sad. He thought about old Santa, and he looked at the reindeer. They were frightened. The fire was still small, but it spread up the struts and was beginning to burn the sleigh. Antonio looked at Rudolph and saw fear in his eyes. Rudolph looked towards Antonio and seemed to be asking for help. If the sleigh were to really catch fire, the reindeer would be hurt. Antonio was frozen with fear, now more for the reindeer than for himself. He could not leave them to die. Antonio looked again at Rudolph and knew he must do something. Through the snow he ran to the fire at the back of the sleigh. With his mittens he scooped up snow and threw it at the fire. It hardly made a difference. He bent over and using both hands shoveled snow at the flames. Faster and faster he shoveled. The snow sizzled and steamed, and Antonio continued. He worked so quickly that the runners became covered in snow, and the fire there disappeared. He continued to heave the snow as fast as he could at the sleigh, and the fire fought back, but Antonio only worked faster. He kept on until he was about to fall from exhaustion, when the flames gave one last flash, then died. Now only the sound of steaming snow was left. Antonio had fallen to his knees. He picked snow up with his mittens and patted it to the charred areas. His mittens were wet, but warm, as he held snow to the last glowing areas of the sleigh. Antonio was so exhausted he could barely hold the snow against the sleigh. Suddenly, a voice sent fear like a shock through his body. "What are you doing to my sleigh?" Santa's voice boomed out. Antonio couldn't speak from fear. He pulled his mittens away from the sleigh where he had put out the last of the fire and looked into Santa's eyes. There were tears flooding down Antonio's cheeks. Santa saw immediately that Antonio had put out the fire. He bent over and picked Antonio up in his arms and held him to his huge chest. I see, he said gently. Antonio put his arms around Santa's neck and held on as Santa bent over to look at his sleigh. He reached down and felt the struts, and they were charred but firm. He felt the burned area of the sleigh, and it too was charred, but Antonio had caught the fire just in time. It had not burned through the sleigh. "You saved my sleigh, my boy." Santa looked up and saw Rudolph. He could see a great joy in Rudolph's eyes. By now Antonio could talk. Through his sobs he said, "Santa, your sleigh caught a farolita when you landed. I was afraid that your sleigh would burn up, but mostly I was afraid for Rudolph and the reindeer." Santa looked deep into Antonio's eyes. There was great love and thankfulness in Santa's heart. "Thank you." And Santa paused, for he didn't yet know the name of the small boy who had saved this Christmas. "What is your name, my friend?" Santa asked. Antonio Gonzalez, Mr. Santa Claus." Santa laughed. "Antonio, you can call me Santa." He gave Antonio a big hug, then kissed him on the cheek. "You saved Christmas for the whole world, Antonio. This is a great thing. The whole world should thank you. But why were you on the roof, Antonio?" And Antonio told him the story about his friends and his grandfather, and how he had climbed onto his roof to know for sure if Santa was real. Santa listened, and as Antonio told his story, Santa checked his sleigh one more time. It was strong enough to deliver all the gifts. Santa turned his head and looked up at the moon, and he began to move quickly. "I have lost time. I have a lot of traveling to do yet tonight." Santa lifted Antonio into his sleigh, then crawled up into the seat next to Antonio. Santa turned to Antonio and pushed him back into the huge leather seat of the sleigh. From up here, Antonio could see the farolitos for miles. "Now hold on tight, Antonio." Antonio wrapped his arms around the brass rails that ran along the top of the seat. Santa bent forward and untied the reins. A smile crept across Santa's face as he looked again at Antonio. Then he looked to Rudolph, and Rudolph winked. Santa snapped the reins and yelled out, "Rudolph, away!" The reindeer at once lunged to their task. The sleigh cut through the snow, and in an instant lifted into the air. Antonio's heart leapt too. The snow on his face, the moon in the sky, the sight of the tops of the houses of Santa Fe lined with farolitos filled Antonio with a joy so full he could hardly breathe. "Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen," Santa called out. The reindeer leaped together in a most beautiful rhythm, and the sleigh surged with each leap. High into the air the sleigh soared. In a wide circle it ascended. Finally the sleigh leveled off, and the reindeer slowed to a regular run. Santa turned to Antonio and said, "Antonio, I want you to guide my sleigh. No one has ever flown my sleigh before, but you have earned it." Antonio took the reins, and since he had driven horses before with his grandfather, he knew how to guide the team. He flew them high, high into the air, up above the lights of Santa Fe, until he could see all of the country for miles in every direction. The mountains of the Navajo, the mountains to the north, where his old family lived. Antonio felt in his heart a great wonder and joy as he looked out over the earth. He felt the love in the hearts of all that he could see on this Christmas night. Santa, too, was looking out, as he never had before, for he had always had to guide the sleigh. But now he could just look out, too. He turned to Antonio and said, "I'm going to tell you something, but you have to promise never to tell anyone." "What is it, Santa?" "You have to promise." "I promise, Santa." "Well, Antonio, in every town there is someone whose home is open to me, so that if I need a little food or to warm up, I can go there. I think it's time to go there now. Would you like to come?" "Well, sure, Santa, very much." Santa reached over and took hold of the reins, and the reindeer turned sharply and flew like the wind to the outskirts of Santa Fe. Soon the sleigh was whooshing low over the rooftops, fast, fast, as Santa flew closer to the warming house. Antonio looked out over the edge of the sleigh and thought to himself, "This looks like my neighborhood." Santa pulled on the reins, and the sleigh turned suddenly down and to the right, and then came quickly onto a rooftop. "Whoa, Rudolph, whoa!" And Santa pulled firm on the reins. The sleigh stopped quickly. Santa looked to the back of the sleigh. This time, No farolitos had been disturbed. Antonio looked around, and something seemed strangely familiar about this place. Santa helped him down from the tall seat. The reindeer by now were munching on fresh straw laid out for them on the rooftop. Antonio looked some more and said quietly to himself, "This is my grandfather's house." Santa said, "Come on, Antonio, hold my hand." Santa took Antonio's hand, and in a flash Antonio moved so quickly down the chimney he had to close his eyes. When he opened them, he was standing next to Santa, and he saw his grandfather awake and greeting Santa like an old friend. "Santa, you are late, and what have you here but my little Antonio?" "Your little Antonio?" Santa looked at Grandpa, then at Antonio, and laughed a hearty ho, 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 ho. "Of course. Your little Antonio is a hero, Mr. Gonzalez. If it weren't for him, there would have been no Christmas for the world." And Santa told Grandpa the story, as they all sat at the old wood table and sipped on hot cider and ate warm biscochitos. Antonio told, too, how he had flown the sleigh so high he could see the mountains to the north where the old family lived. And Grandfather told how he had gone up to give Antonio a goodnight kiss, but Antonio wasn't there, and he had been very worried. But now he was very happy, because now he knew that Antonio would always believe him, and they had a very special secret to share. Santa finished the last of the warm cider, then turned to Grandpa and said, "I must be on my way. Thank you, Mr. Gonzalez, for the warmth of your home and your heart." And then Santa turned to Antonio, and his gentle hand reached out and touched his face. "And thank you, Antonio, for saving Christmas for the world. We will be friends now, like your grandfather and I, for a long, long time. Bless you." And with that, Santa stood up and walked over towards the chimney. "Goodbye, Santa," Antonio and Grandfather said together. Santa waved, then touched his finger to the side of his nose, and in an instant was gone. Then Antonio and Grandfather heard the sound of the prancing hooves on the rooftop. "Away, Rudolph, away!" And there was a sudden noise and then it was silent. Grandfather came over and hugged Antonio and said, "It's time for you to go to sleep, my little Antonio." And Antonio, who by now was very tired, turned to his grandfather and said, "Grandfather, I always believed you, and I always will." Just then they heard a loud, joyous voice ring out in the night, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night." Before Christmas vacation was over, Antonio did his homework, and although he wanted to write about the most exciting thing that happened, he knew no one would believe him, and besides, it was a secret. So instead, he wrote about skiing down the big hill on his new skis. Only a few people know about Antonio. It is a secret. And now you too know about the small boy from Santa Fe who saved Christmas for the world.